don't think I'd point to any one particular thing. I think that overall, all evidence seems to point that way. Even if you're in a very high airplane, whether the Earth was round or flat, you'd see a flat horizon. And so when you look at the entirety of our first-hand information saying that it is flat, it's hard philosophically to break away from that. And it's interesting too because it reminds me of one of Galileo's dialogues, and he's arguing against the view of the time, or these two fellows in it are, and one of them, is arguing the heliocentric sort of Copernican model, and the other one's, arguing the view of the time, which has more to do with like epicycles and epicenters and whatnot, and the one arguing the view of the time, surprisingly, says exactly what she said is like there's so much evidence that the Earth doesn't move. It's insurmountable, and it all fits together so beautifully. But I think when you look at, I think the evidence is fairly even on both sides. I don't think there's any real damning evidence one way or the other. When you have a view that's universally accepted, or is an academic consensus for such a long time, it's always going to appear more true than any other view you put in front of it. It's actually there's some philosophy of science guys that talk quite a bit about this, and how new ideas and new scientific revolutions and are always patently false next to the current view. And it's not until they sort of grow up and get legs of their own. I think it was Planck said, and I could be wrong in that, you might want to check that reference, but I believe he said, of course, famous scientist, new scientific ideas don't, win over the people. The way they come into truth and into theory and into use is when the old group dies off and the younger people who got introduced to it grow up. And of course, I'm paraphrasing a bit. So I would say something about that. I don't think it really says that much that all the arguments say that the Earth is round. I think there's very good evidence both ways. Like I was saying, I don't think you can prove whether it's flat or round, but I would almost hazard you to prove that the Earth is round when you ask that, because when you think about it, our default mode would be to say it's flat. Almost every single religion in the world at some point has claimed it's flat. It seems to be the default view of things. And when you ask the question, is the Earth round? You start to get into these arguments. For example, you've likely heard of Aristophanes' argument, where the shadows from sticks can point towards a round Earth. But in actuality, what he's doing is he's assuming the Earth is round, and he's trying to figure out the circumference of it. So right there, it's right off. But if you look at the exact same experiment, and it was performed twice before, once probably a million times before, to be honest, but 2 times I'm going to mention. Once by Dallas scholars very early on, and then again by Samuel Botham, who sort of founded our movement in the late 1800s. They both come to the conclusion, without using assumption, that the Earth is flat, and the data 100% proves that, rather than assumes that it's round and tries to figure out some tertiary or value. So I would say, let's put some sticks in the ground and measure the shadows, and what you'll find is a map of the Earth that's very similar to the UN logo, which of course is our logo too. I believe we had it first, though. And the sun going around in a ring around the North Pole, what we would normally call the equator, would be the path of the sun. And so when you see these 2 experiments, that one supposedly proves the Earth is round, and one supposedly proves the Earth is flat, and they both are using the same data set, and they've come to wildly different conclusions. It sort of casts a lot of doubt on our ability to prove anything. That's another. It's like a good question, and it's one that comes up a lot. And we've had a lot of different arguments for that. Where the thing about the Flat Earth Society is that we're kind of an umbrella group for a bunch of different people that believe the Earth is flat. And so, if you look at, I mentioned him earlier, Robotham, his explanation for that is that it was a matter of perspective, and that, for example, if you look at a very long street and it's got a bunch of light poles, street lamps down it. As those street lamps recede away from you, assuming it's a perfectly straight road and it's perfectly flat, of course it's not, but, for the purposes of the discussion, you'll see that the bottom of them shrinks away and until that disappears. And what you're left with is the top of the lamp, the mast, in this case, analogously. My view of that is a bit more advanced in that I'm a trained in mathematics and computer science, so I tend to get some of the weirder views in our society under my banner. I actually believe that space is curved and the Earth is therefore flat, and I use some of Einstein's work on that to show that, as well as some older work as well. But so I would say, that's to be expected. It's light traveling through space, curved space, is going to end up hitting the water, and the water is still going to be flat. It gets pretty complicated to explain that point of view, though. So
absolutely, yeah.
That's why I gave you the other one first. And there's a wealth of different other ideas between here and there that explain it. I remember I met one fellow, and he. And it's not an experiment I've been able to replicate recently, but or I don't since I've heard it. But he would say that he could make the hull of the ship reappear through use of a telescope, which was rather interesting. Though I've actually done a fair amount of sailing in my life, either on cruises or just with friends and whatnot. And one thing that always struck me is that far before you see the masts pop up first, almost a ridiculous amount of the time, a ridiculous amount of the time, the ship will fade out before you ever see anything like that. And then when you're looking at the smaller subset, I've heard explanations that, well, maybe there's an electromagnetic accelerant that would affect light, which is kind of ridiculous in my view, or maybe it's just simple refraction or something of that nature. So there's a whole hat box full of different explanations from different types of flat earthers. Well, usually I don't say too much. I'm not very evangelical in that I don't, go out and try to convince people that they're wrong, and they look at the evidence and they come to their conclusions, and I'm happy with mine. It often surprised me how often they're not happy with my conclusion, and they'd rather attack the flat Earth view rather than just say live and let live.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or they say I'm ignorant or some such. But so I wouldn't say too much other than if I had to make the argument, I've done in the past all over the place. I usually would ask them, why do you believe the Earth is round? And usually you'll get back, a few stock answers like, oh, toilets flush the opposite way in Antarctica, which is, an urban myth. You can look up on Snopes.com or something like that. Or you hear, circumnavigation is not possible on a flat Earth. And of course it is. It'd be the case of following a circle around the North Pole. There's some interesting tests that folks have done with laser beams and measuring, how level water is, which I mentioned earlier. And then again, to show me the curve. Where's the supposed curvature we're seeing? And it's a lot harder to disprove the flat Earth and also prove the round Earth than one would think. I think people think of ideas as either true or false, and in reality, you only really deal with false ideas and that are sort of reaching towards truth.